My name is Anna Miller, and today, with a slight flutter in my chest and the usual morning bustle, I open my eyes on the day of my 32nd birthday. Not a round date, but for some reason, this year I especially wanted to remember the day. The sun's rays were already softly making their way through the snow-white curtains in our bedroom, spreading a warm light throughout the room. And in this silence I held my breath for a moment, catching the feeling that everything in my life is still. In its place, I live with my husband James, my constant companion and support, a man who is only 4 years older than me. But it seems that he always knew a little more, a little earlier, and was there at the right moment when I hesitated. Together with us is our sunny boy, 6-year-old Charlie, whose eyes shine with the same unpredictable joy as his father's. We are a small but strong family of 3, and despite the daily disagreements and inevitable fatigue, I know that we love each other. Truly. Today, something unusual was on the agenda: attending a wedding ceremony arranged by a friend of James. Not my friend, which is important. I admit that I know these people only by sight. Smiles, nods, neutral, how are you? All this more out of duty than from heartfelt concern. But James was happy with the invitation, and I did not want to spoil his enthusiasm. The ceremony took place in a truly luxurious hotel. Marble staircases, carpets that looked like they were hand-painted, impeccably dressed waiters, and music pouring out of a live piano. I was reservedly admiring, allowing myself to raise my eyebrows slightly and give approving glances, while James, with his unfailing charisma and ease, was chatting with everyone in a row, exchanging greetings, recalling some events, joking, as if he had returned to an old company. I felt superfluous. Nodding politely, I excused myself and headed to the toilet, not to relieve myself, but to hide from the crowd for a minute, wash up, catch my breath. But upon returning, I unexpectedly found myself in the epicenter of a strange scene. I was greeted by someone's sharp whisper so loud that it cut my ears, as if it was uttered on purpose for me to hear. It was angry, caustic, and completely inappropriate. These words did not concern me directly, but something unpleasant hung in the air, as if I had intruded where I should not have. I did not try to figure it out. I did not want a scene. Deciding that my best tactic was to leave, I slowly moved toward the exit, but almost immediately there was a rough, ear-piercing shout. "Hey!" It was clearly aimed at me, but I did not stop or turn around, hoping that ignoring it would settle everything. I was wrong. Footsteps sounded behind me, quick, heavy, as if someone was running, and my heart sank. Before I could think about what to do, my arm was grabbed abruptly. Instinctively, I turned around and saw a breathless woman standing in front of me, her face expressing surprise bordering on disappointment. I automatically freed myself from her grip, twisting my wrist as when I was a child, when I was learning to slip away from my older sister's hands, and her body jerked back with an exaggerated, almost theatrical reaction, as if I had hit her. Not a second had passed before another woman approached, her face twisted with indignation, her voice trembling with accusation. She showered me with reproaches of rudeness, ignorance, some kind of violence that did not happen, and most importantly, she began asking questions as if I were a criminal. "Who are you? What are you doing here? Who called you?" Sounded with growing irritation. I stood there, shocked, because I really did not know who they were. And then they introduced themselves. The one who was screaming declared that she was my sister Natalia, the second one my mother. These names did not ignite anything in me, did not cause a drop of recognition. I sincerely looked at them, not believing, not understanding. This was some kind of mistake. This was impossible. The situation quickly heated up. They were outraged by my game. My words only angered them. And then 2 more men approached, attracted by the commotion that had begun. One of them, a distinguished man with a cold gaze, was named my father. His face hardened at the sight of me, his features tense, as if he were holding back irritation. The other, young, confused, pale, was Benjamin. Who was he? I didn't know, but he looked at me as if he had seen a ghost. The argument grew. Natalia, in despair, claimed that I had come to her wedding without an invitation. The guests glanced sideways, some whispered, some openly stared, as if we were a scene from a cheap drama. I felt myself losing ground. There were familiar names all around, but strange faces, and all this in a place that should have been joyful and solemn. A loud voice from the crowd, "Call security!" rang out like a shot. Panic began to grow. Someone shouted warningly, "Stay away from her!" I looked around trying to figure out who they were talking to. The man everyone called Dad had taken Natalia's side, his words firm, sharp, accusing, and Benjamin, the one who had been looking at me with pain, was trying to intervene, looking at me like I was fading hope. I muttered something under my breath, either a prayer or an objection, but it was drowned out by the noise of voices. And then James appeared. He literally burst into the proceedings like a fresh breeze in a stuffy room, with a new topic, a new focus. "There you are, Anna. I've been looking for you everywhere," he said loudly, with such relief that everyone turned around. His voice pierced the tension like a knife through butter. I couldn't help but smile, and even though it was a forced smile, with the taste of rice in my throat, it was real. James instantly assessed the situation with his sharp, analytical gaze. Natalia, who had been so furiously interested in where James was, threw such a sharp, stinging glance in my direction that for a moment it seemed to me as if real anger had flared in her eyes, not irritation, not bewilderment, but accumulated, suffered anger, as if my simple presence here was destroying something important, precious to her. And when I took a step to the side, retreating closer to James, she glared at me with that gaze, as if trying to stab me with the last word. Even if she had not yet uttered it, my parents, or rather the people who called themselves that, Mom and Dad, watched what was happening with an expression of bewilderment. Their faces seemed frozen at that point where bewilderment meets alienation, and the desire to understand borders on instinctive rejection. And in that almost deathly silence, where sounds were drowned out by the weight of pent-up emotions, the first to dare speak was Benjamin, a young man who struck me as fragilely honest. His voice was timid, almost apologetic, and he began by addressing James politely. "Mr. Miller, I must apologize. My wife spoke too harshly. She had no right to do so. We are very sorry, and especially your wife." He hesitated, as if something was struggling within him, then looked at Natalia with an expression that mingled confusion and pleading. "Come on, Natalia," he said a little louder. "Apologize to her." But Natalia, flushing like dry paper from a spark, instantly flared up with anger. "Why should I? She should apologize to me." Her voice trembled, not from weakness but from rage, and turning to those present, she added with pathos, "She ruined our important day. This woman is a disgrace to the family. We should have erased her from our lives long ago, and never had anything to do with her again." These words seemed to split the air. Benjamin lowered his head, then looked up at me, at her, back at me, as if he was looking for something to cling to, as if he wanted to understand what exactly had happened here and why it was so distorted. And then those who still claimed parental authority, Dad and Mom, intervened in the conversation. They spoke slowly, with a kind of tired resignation, as if they knew that the truth would burst out, but hoped that this moment would never come. "Oh, Benjamin," sighed the woman who called herself my mother, "we are terribly sorry that our eldest daughter was always problematic. We only acknowledged her 10 years ago, when she found us herself. We tried not to advertise it. No one knows how she found out about Natalia's wedding, but obviously she didn't come here with good intentions." Their words crashed down on me like waves. Outcast, loser, parasite. It was not just an accusation, it was an exposure of all the shadows that they had hidden for years behind the facade of respectability. They easily told me that I never received a higher education, got by on odd jobs, always in debt, always with my head down. They said that if they helped me, it was solely out of a sense of duty, and I should be grateful that at least during my studies I was sometimes given a roof over my head. These statements tore apart the remaining doubts in me. Yes, they really are my biological parents. Yes, this is really my younger sister. Yes, this is the story of my youth. But no, there is nothing left of love between us, only names, only biology, only the guilt that I carried for too long. And looking at Natalia, the favorite, the pride, the center of their universe, I realized how unfair our roles had been from the very beginning. She was 5 years younger than me, beloved, desired, always caressed with attention. I remember how, as a child, Our house resembled not so much a home as a hospital. My father was a doctor, and part of the house served as a waiting room, and my mother, always in a white coat, was his assistant, a nurse, a mother to everyone except me. From the outside, we looked like an ideal family, reliable, close-knit, exemplary, but inside everything was different. I do not remember my mother's hugs or morning kisses, but I remember well how I tried to earn love with grades, obedience, silent agreement. Over time, I realized that their love is a kind of currency that I will never have enough of. Natalia got everything effortlessly: beauty, praise, attention. I got only responsibilities. I was smart. It was my only way to survive, to prove my worth. I excelled at school, hid my grievances in textbooks, dissolved in knowledge, because at home no one believed in my potential. For them, I was someone who, in their words, is unlikely to go to college, so it is better to go straight to work. My dreams were ignored, my desires were devalued. I was not a daughter, I was a project, a failure, something that needed to be quickly put on its feet and forgotten. When I graduated from school, their message was clear, almost truism. You are not made for university, Anna. You are not made for success. Find a job, bring money into the house, be grateful that we raised you at all. I will never forget these conversations, dry, cold-blooded, as if they were talking not about me, but about some other girl, and yet even then, they were enthusiastically discussing what college Natalia would go to, how they would finance her studies, how she deserved the best. Years passed, and with each step towards independence, I increasingly understood that waiting for parental love was like waiting for warmth from marble. I had no choice but to leave, cut it off, forget. I accepted it. I grew up, I survived. But standing now in front of these people and listening to them confirm out loud the pain that I had kept inside for years was unbearable. Even James, with his inner fortitude, squeezed my hand a little tighter, as if he could feel the ground slipping out from under me. They said it to me so easily, so casually, as if their own words had no weight, left no trace, as if I didn't care, as if I didn't hear and feel how each of their remarks pierced inside me, leaving invisible scars. They had no idea that I wasn't just listening, I was remembering. Not because I wanted to, but because my memory refused to let go of these words, as if I already knew that one day I would have to review them. I wrote down in notebooks, on scraps of paper, on an old phone, everything they said, everything that hurt, humiliated, rejected throughout my school years. I kept my invisible diary of pain, collecting every insult, every mean phrase, every condescending "what can you expect from her?" My sister Natalia always followed in her parents' footsteps, not because she truly loved them, but because she understood from childhood that it was more advantageous to be with them than with me. She was their reflection, only younger, more flexible, with eyes that reflected a thirst for approval. Natalia humiliated me with the ease with which someone else snaps their fingers, and not secretly, not surreptitiously, but openly, defiantly, out loud. I will become a doctor, I will continue my father's practice. Don't worry, sister, I will work for both of us since you can't cope, she said, and my parents, sitting at the table, nodded in response, smiling as if it was not me, but she who had just saved the world. These lines played out in front of me over and over again, as if it were a family ritual, where I was always relegated to the role of a silent extra, a supporting character, a burden, a shadow, a mistake that had to be left behind. And when school ended, I did the only thing I could do at the time. I went to work, jumping from one part-time job to another. I lived like that for about 4 years. Technically, I lived at home, but it felt like I was a lodger in my own family, unwanted, annoying, and all they expected of me was to stay out of their way. They didn't let me go because they needed me, but because they kept me under control. It was convenient for them to have me around, to be able to impose yet another should. But one day I realized that I was an adult, and that meant I could leave, rent a place, make my own decisions without their consent, without their views. I moved, albeit not immediately to ideal conditions. I looked for a garage, chose a cheaper one, reported a lower income than I actually had, because even then I still hoped to somehow ease their financial burden. As ridiculous as it sounds now, I started saving money, investing little by little, while Natalia was preparing for exams, repeating that she could not concentrate when I was in the house. My parents finally, politely but firmly, asked me to leave. For them, this was probably a temporary solution, a pause, but for me it was salvation. I left, and never came back. Years passed, they didn't call, didn't write, I in turn didn't seek a meeting, they no longer needed me, they had Natalia, she was their pride, their meaning, the center of the universe. I was oblivion. 10 years later, accidentally finding myself at her wedding, an event that could have passed without me. Like thousands of other days, I heard an argument, at first muffled, then louder. Natalia was arguing with Benjamin. Despite the general tension, it seemed that the essence was something banal. The guest list, it seemed someone came, someone was not invited. I realized that the conversation was about me, Benjamin said firmly. She is a guest. And although I did not try to disrupt their celebration, and recognized that this was their day, I could not distance myself from the inner confusion. After all, this was my family, so to speak, a broken one but still history to which I belonged. The quarrel was growing, and then my father, who had been standing silently until then, suddenly leaned forward. His voice sounded sharp. Wait, Benjamin Miller? Isn't he the son of that Miller, the head of the county hospital? His eyes widened, and a new interest rang in his voice. Mother and Natalia, hearing this name, exchanged glances. Their expressions changed instantly, as if a door had opened before them into a world to which they longed to belong. And at that moment James stepped forward, calmly, reservedly, with that confidence of which he always had more than was required. He extended his hand. It is very nice to meet you. I am James Miller, and this is my wife Anna. His voice was warm, but there was a sense of determination in it. The words hung in the air, and I watched as my parents' faces slowly, as if in slow motion, filled with astonishment. They exchanged new glances, this time wary, searching. They knew the name that had once meant social status to them, belonging to the best. James's parents were respected doctors who had spent decades running the very hospital they had once aspired to enter. As if that would give them a passport to the upper caste, James, my husband, was not just promising. He was a passionate, inspired, full of ideas and kindness, a medical student with an attitude to life that was different from the cynical world I had grown up in. In that moment I saw a sharp contrast. All their youth they had disbelieved in my potential, considered me a failure, and now they looked at me with open, almost painful amazement. Suddenly, when the air was filled with a wary silence, when my parents' reactions wavered between shock and a poorly concealed desire to rethink their previous views on my life, Benjamin, Natalia's husband, intervened reservedly, politely, as if trying to defuse the situation, to prevent it from developing into something irreversible, but perhaps also with a sincere desire to clarify what, in his opinion, had become a misunderstanding. His voice, calm and even, still betrayed confusion. It's almost surreal, he began, looking around at everyone around. To imagine that Dar Miller's wife is your sister Anna. Isn't this a strange coincidence? Are we related now? In his voice there was no mockery or sarcasm, but rather disbelief in the very fact, in the fact that life can turn out this way, connecting people who previously perhaps would never have crossed paths. He paused for a moment as if collecting his thoughts and then added, I'm sorry for anything that might have been taken the wrong way. My family, they can be harsh at times, but there was no malice in it. I'm truly sorry for the way you were received today. His words were unexpected but not ostentatious. He was trying to straighten out what was falling apart before my eyes. I nodded in gratitude, still not believing that I was hearing such words from him. James, standing next to me, squeezed my hand a little tighter, as if supporting me without words. Meanwhile, Benjamin continued, You may not know, but a few months ago I examined Max. He had a cold, coughing, complaining of chest pains. James brought him to me. These words reminded me of that rare moment when our paths crossed, not in a family drama, but in a completely different professional context. Yes, I brought our son to Benjamin then because I trusted his medical reputation more than my past grievances. I remember that based on the test results I recommended starting treatment as soon as possible. He said, now, turning more to James, and I still think it would be better for Max to have a full examination. I can do it myself, we have everything we need at the hospital. His offer sounded kind, with genuine concern, but despite this, I felt an unpleasant resistance inside. I hesitated, not because I doubted his professionalism, but because I still could not accept the idea that our son could become part of this story. Thank you, I answered softly. But we decided to consult with another specialist. A second opinion would not be superfluous. Surprise flashed in his eyes, even offense, but he restrained himself, only nodding slightly. I understood that he sincerely wanted to help, but I could no longer allow someone even in a white coat to look at my son as a case, part of a system, part of an equation in which my feelings did not matter. And then, as if emerging from the shadows, a voice rang out, piercing, cold, filled with old malice. You act like you're above everyone else, I heard. Do you think that because you married a doctor, that makes you smarter? Or better than you are? And what about your child? Poor boy. It was Natalia. Her voice was filled with everything she had been holding back until that moment. Venom, contempt, the desire to stab. The words flew like needles. Benjamin immediately turned to her, alarmed. Natalia! Stop it, we're a family, why are you saying that? But she didn't back down, her face was frozen in a stubborn expression. She looked at me as if I had taken something valuable from her. As if my existence was a challenge in itself. James turned slowly to face me. His gaze quiet, almost sad, but with a new wary edge. Anna, he said. These people, are they really your family? I didn't answer right away, then I shook my head. No, they're not family anymore. I stood there in the middle of these strange faces that had once held the titles of mom, dad, sister, and I told them out loud what I had carried inside for so long. I told them how they punished me for no reason as a child, how I was deprived of dinner for any misbehavior, while Natalia got extra. I remembered how I got hand-me-down clothes, while Natalia got dresses that were put on display at church on Sundays. I told them how they threw away my school materials, telling me that I wouldn't need them anyway. I didn't cry, I just talked. Family doesn't keep you in a basement overnight for breaking a plate, doesn't sell your personal belongings to buy something new for their youngest daughter, doesn't humiliate you every day. That's not family. Those are just people who were once a part of my life. I could feel those words ringing out too loudly in the room. As someone in the room froze, listening, Benjamin was silent, listening, his eyes widening, reflecting a horror he probably couldn't have imagined before. I saw my father's lips tighten, his face turn white. My mother looked away. Neither of them argued, they didn't rush to refute, but it wouldn't last. Stop it, Natalia screamed. Stop lying. We never did anything like that. This is all you. You were a loser from the start. Don't you dare slander us, Anna. Her voice trembled, but not from remorse. From anger. Benjamin looked at her. And there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Cold contempt. And I thought, if she had just turned away and let me go, hadn't tried to keep me in the house, hadn't clung to her illusion of superiority, none of this would have happened. But she didn't leave, she chose to stay. And now she watched as the walls they had built over decades crumbled. Instead of clearing up the misunderstanding or fixing at least some of the pain that had built up in my every silence over the years, the truth about our family had come out, exposing everything that had been hidden beneath the comfortable facade and the strong family photographs, changing not only the perception of what was happening, but the very essence of the relationship between us, irrevocably and perhaps forever. And in this new naked reality, where lies crumbled under the pressure of simple facts, suddenly Benjamin himself, my sister's husband, the man with whom, it would seem, I had just found a thin thread of mutual understanding, accused me of lying restrainedly, politely, but still with a hint of doubt, which I was so tired of resisting. Excuse me, Mrs. Miller, he said, addressing me formally, as if there was no professional contact between us, no common blood through marriage. But I asked you earlier about your education, and you said you only graduated from high school. His voice was full of confusion, and his face expressed not so much reproach as genuine bewilderment. But looking straight into his eyes, I answered, You didn't ask, you assumed, and I didn't dissuade you, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed anyone's approval. And then I said what I had hidden until that moment only out of habit. Not only did I graduate from college, but I also founded my own company, which plays a key role in the work of your clinic. These words seemed to ring out in the room, and everyone's faces froze. Sister Natalia pressed her lips together, looking at me as if I had suddenly become someone completely different, alien, incomprehensible. My parents were dumbfounded, their expressions changing from anger to bewilderment. And for a moment I felt like I was watching their internal picture of the world crumble. "She's lying," Natalia exclaimed. "She's just a high school graduate. How can you believe that she went to college without us knowing?" My mother immediately picked up, her voice full of venom and doubt. "Do you really think you can study in secret when we've been helping you your whole life?" "Yes, I did," I said calmly, feeling a smooth, warm sense of dignity flare up in my chest. "And I didn't have to answer to people who didn't consider me part of their family." Their distrust hung in the air, and my father, unable to bear it any longer, stepped forward. "How dare you talk to us like that? We've always been against your idea of education." His voice was shaking with anger, and I answered calmly without looking away. "I didn't ask your permission and I didn't need it. After finishing school, I worked several jobs as a waitress, a library assistant, and administrator in a small workshop, and saved a little from each paycheck until I could finally afford to go to school. I lived alone, paid for my own place, studied at night, and built everything from scratch, and it was in college that I met James. Then still a medical student, passionate, kind, incredibly purposeful, with that look in which I first saw respect. These memories flooded me with such force that tears welled up in my eyes, not from pain, but from how far I was able to get from the girl who was once shamefully hidden from guests. Meanwhile, Natalia, pale, muttered uncertainly, I can't believe it. I always thought that she was incapable of achieving anything on her own." Her words were not an attack, they were frank confusion. She stood there in indecision, unable to understand why I seemed happier than she was, more successful, more complete, despite the fact that I was told my entire childhood that I was not enough. Perhaps because I never gave up, perhaps because despite everything I continued to strive, or maybe because I learned to be free. I decided to approach her, and when the distance between us shortened, I added reservedly, "Since we are talking frankly, Natalia, I heard that you, on the contrary, dropped out of high school. Is that true?" A quiet sigh was heard in the room, as if someone forgot to breathe. Benjamin turned abruptly to his wife. His face changed, my parents turned white, their eyes darting around as if seeking salvation. "What did you just say? Who dropped out of school?" Natalia asked, her voice shaking. And I almost admired the way she tried to maintain her courage despite her shaking fingers. "A distant relative of ours, my father's cousin, told me that," I continued calmly. "He was always famous for his knowledge. He said that you failed the entrance exams to the prestigious school you were so well prepared for. And then you just disappeared, became withdrawn. And then years later you reappeared, married in an arrangement arranged by our parents." I continued, and Benjamin's face grew sterner. His lips pressed together, his jaw tense. He was silent. But his silence made more sense than his screaming. And my parents stood there like a pair of stone statues, unable to intervene. "By the way," I added, "isn't it true that your job at the clinic is a sham? You have no management training. You just sit in the waiting room, sign papers, and do what you're told. Haven't you been inflating your achievements? Stop it. You made it all up. It's a lie." Natalia screamed, and her voice was no longer angry but panicked. Maybe everything I'd heard was just a rumor, maybe. Whether they believed it or not was up to them. But looking into Benjamin's eyes, I saw how he no longer sought support in her. And then Natalia, as if realizing for the first time how much everything had changed, turned to him, desperately peering into his face as if it were her last hope, searching there for at least a shadow of trust, at least a hint of his former confidence. His face became a living reflection of all the feelings that were slowly but surely rising to the surface: doubt, confusion, resentment, mixed with that almost tangible contempt that is rarely instantaneous, but which inevitably builds like a tidal wave if you accumulate disappointment for a long time. Benjamin looked at Natalia as if he were seeing her for the first time. Not as a wife, not as a life partner, but as an enigma he was no longer sure he could or wanted, to solve. He sighed heavily and said, "You said you went to that prestigious women's university in Boston, but now even that seems in doubt." He spoke slowly, like a man trying to maintain his inner balance even though the ground beneath his feet was already treacherously shaky. He continued, "You provided documents confirming your qualifications, your connections to the hospital. Are you saying that all of this was faked?" He did not shout, but there was a threat in his voice. Not a physical one, no. A threat to destroy the trust that marriages are built on. Natalia clearly sensed that this threat was real, and throwing a panicked look at me, she threw up her hands sharply as if defending herself. "No. Benjamin, no." Her voice became high, brittle, breaking. "Please don't trust her more than me. You are my husband. You must trust me." He didn't answer right away. He took a step back. His gaze darkened. He didn't shout or curse, but something inside him clearly broke. He said coldly, "Then name me at least one professor from that university you talked about so much, at least one. I want to know that you haven't been lying to me all this time." Natalia turned pale, her eyes darting around. "It doesn't matter anymore," she tried to avoid answering. "It's all in the past." But he was relentless. "On the contrary, it matters now more than ever." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I can call the professor from that department. We know each other. He's a family friend, and he knows the list of graduates well." The silence hanging over us became ringing. Natalia froze, and I saw that her face showed more than just fear. It was panic, almost animalistic. "Benjamin, please stop. What is this all for? If you love me, if you trust me, that's enough," she babbled, and without waiting for a reaction, in a swift movement that seemed both mad and desperate, she snatched the smartphone from his hands and slammed it on the floor with such force that the screen shattered into tiny pieces. Everyone froze. She stomped on the phone with her heels, breathing heavily, as if with each passing second she was moving further and further away from reality. Her face was distorted. There was no trace of the former confident, self-adoring Natalia. Only a grin distorted with rage, a painful tension that made her look like a person who had lost herself. People around began to look around. Someone quietly gasped. Someone took a step back, and someone had already taken out a phone, perhaps to call security. The hotel staff approached, looking at each other sheepishly, unsure whether to intervene. My parents, my former parents, rushed to her, as if trying to calm her down, to hug her, to calm her down, but she struggled, her shoulders twitching like someone whose support had collapsed. The whole scene looked less like a wedding scene than an act of unmasking, and in the midst of this chaos I suddenly realized, these people are not my family, they are strangers, and they always were. I looked at James, his face expressed both anxiety and anticipation. I said quietly, "Shall we go home?" He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Anna, are you sure? We're almost done. Maybe we should stay a little longer." I smiled at him calmly without a trace of irritation and shook my head. "No, it's okay, let's go home." He nodded, and already taking a step towards the exit, suddenly, as if remembering something, said with slight joy, "Let's stop by that pastry shop downstairs on the way. I heard they have a new cake. Everyone is talking about it now, they say it's amazing." I couldn't help but laugh. Sincerely, freeingly we walked away, leaving behind the chaos, the screams, the panic, leaving behind the past. Later, months later, I learned that Benjamin was embroiled in an investigation into inflated prices for treatment and misdiagnosis. His name came up in court documents when it was discovered that many patients had complained about inadequate medical care. And imagine my surprise when my ex-parents, the same ones who had once abandoned me, humiliated me, ignored my needs and achievements, tried to contact me. But, of course, they did not have my current contacts. They did not know that I had long ago changed my number, that the address where I lived no longer belonged to me, that all bridges had long been burned. In desperation, they came to the hospital where James worked. Finding themselves in front of the reception desk, they loudly, almost theatrically declared, "We demand to see our daughter. She is our daughter-in-law. She is the future heir to the hospital. We must talk to her." Their voices echoed through the hall, causing confusion among the staff and patients. They insisted on being put through to the director's son immediately, hoping that James's name would open the door they had closed years ago. "We're really in trouble," I heard one of the receptionists say, retelling the words my ex-parents had spoken in the hospital lobby. "She needs to pay back for the way we raised her. We're a family. Isn't it natural to ask for help?" I sat in James's office, holding a cup of cold coffee, and heard those words as if they were coming through a glass of time, as if they were an echo of the past that had gotten lost and was finding me only now, years later. I was hardly surprised to learn that, in despair and confusion, they were looking for me again, not because they missed me, not because they repented, but because they needed me. But before any of us could react, the answer came from a completely different direction, from James's relatives, his parents, who stood in the waiting room that day with expressions on their faces that no one in their right mind would have dared to argue with. "What business do you have with our daughter?" his mother asked sharply, without a trace of kindness. Their calm but firm stance threw my parents off balance. I recognized from the description how they froze, stunned, how they hastily retreated, disappearing from sight, without having received any sympathy or support. Then there were letters, calls, messages to old email addresses that they may have gotten to through third parties. But each time I learn that they have tried to contact me, I feel neither pain nor anger, just a light, cool feeling of relief, like after a thunderstorm, when the air becomes clearer, when the oppressive heat finally disappears and you can breathe freely. I heard that their clinic had finally closed, leaving behind only the memories of a lost reputation, legal claims, and a multitude of unfinished business. But this did not bother me. It was a pattern. Their own actions had led to this. Rumors began to reach Natalia too, although I tried to avoid everything that concerned her life. The marriage with Benjamin, as I expected, fell apart after only a few months, not only because of the legal troubles Benjamin found himself in after a series of accusations of unreliable diagnoses and price manipulation, but also because of the general breakdown of trust. Natalia, who from a young age lived in a constant thirst for approval, luxury, and superiority, made another attempt to arrange her life through status and influence. She began an affair with a married doctor, much older than herself, hoping that this union would raise her higher in the eyes of society, in the professional environment, in her own illusion. But when the truth came out and the doctor's wife learned of the betrayal, a scandal ensued that went far beyond the hospital walls. The insulted wife filed a lawsuit, demanded compensation for moral damages, and Natalia's story flared up with new colors, no longer as the story of a successful woman, but as a sad spectacle of self-destruction. In despair, Natalia turned to her parents, the very ones who always put her above everyone else, and the very ones who humiliated me for her. Sake lied, manipulated, disowned me. They said that they could no longer support her. They called her a disgrace. Perhaps for the first time in her life, Natalia found herself in the place where I had been all my life. The rumors continued to come like unsent letters. They said that she got a night shift at a supermarket, then at a pharmacy, then at a delivery service, that she started having health problems, that her psyche couldn't handle the stress, that at some point she found herself homeless. These stories brought no joy, no satisfaction. I just realized that I was no longer interested. I didn't wish her harm, but I couldn't feel pity either, just emptiness, as if a page had turned and there was no desire to go back, to reread, to look between the lines for the meaning that was never there. And my parents, now just old people without influence, without work, with a past that does not forget, they, as far as I knew, had difficulty getting jobs in any institutions. Their last name raised questions, and their history suspicions. They could no longer be doctors, and no clinic was in a hurry to hire them. Perhaps I could, ironically, offer them a place in one of my projects, but no, not because I am vindictive, but because they no longer meant anything to me, just figures from a forgotten chapter. As for my son, his health improved rapidly. We went to another clinic, and there they immediately gave us a correct diagnosis, prescribed treatment that finally began to bring results. Hospitalization was not necessary. We simply learned to monitor, control, support, and Max again ran, laughed, looked at us with the same trust that gives the strength not to be afraid of either the past or the future. I realized that I can, must, and will do everything possible to protect my family, a real family, not made up of those who gave me a name, but of those who gave me love, respect, and a new meaning in life. And in this silence that I had been searching for so long, I finally felt. I am no longer afraid, I am not looking for approval, I am not proving myself, I am simply living, and that is enough.